The wind howled through the ancient pines as James Blackwood made his final rounds of the evening. 20 years as a forest ranger hadn't dulled his love for these woods, but tonight something felt different. The air crackled with an energy he couldn't explain, making the hairs on the back of his neck stand up despite the bitter cold. At 45, James had grown accustomed to the solitude of his ranger station deep in the Cascade Mountains. The isolation that drove others away had become his comfort, especially after losing his wife Rachel to cancer 3 years ago. The forest understood grief, he'd learned. It held space for pain without trying to fix it. The first sign that this night would change everything came as a piercing whine that cut through the storm's fury. James looked up just in time to see a streak of violet light tear across the sky, moving in ways no human aircraft could manage. The object spiraled downward, leaving a trail of sparking energy in its wake before disappearing behind the ridge to the north. "Well, that's not in the Ranger Handbook," he muttered, already reaching for his emergency pack. Whatever had crashed, he had a duty to investigate. The temperature was dropping fast, and the storm was getting worse. The trek through deepening snow took nearly an hour. When James finally crested the ridge, he had to blink several times to process what he was seeing. A sleek vessel about the size of a school bus lay half buried in the snow, its metallic surface rippling with patterns of light that seemed to pulse in time with some hidden heartbeat. Steam rose where snowflakes touched its hull, creating an otherworldly mist in the beam of his flashlight. James approached cautiously, years of wilderness training keeping his movements slow and deliberate. The craft's design was like nothing he'd ever seen, all flowing curves and organic shapes that seemed to defy traditional engineering. As he drew closer, a section of the hull suddenly shimmered and became transparent, revealing a sight that stopped him in his tracks. Inside were dozens of humanoid figures, each no taller than his hand. They moved with purpose through what appeared to be a command center filled with crystalline technology that glowed with inner light. Their skin tones ranged from deep indigo to pale violet, and they wore uniforms that seemed woven from starlight itself. Before James could retreat to a safer distance, one of the ship's panels slid open with a musical tone. A figure emerged, clearly their leader based on how the others deferred to her. Her skin was the color of twilight, marked with luminescent patterns that swirled like galaxies across her exposed arms and face. Despite her tiny size, she carried herself with unmistakable authority. "Step back, giant," she commanded in perfect English, though her voice carried harmonics no human throat could produce. "I am Commander Talia of the Stellar Reconnaissance Fleet. Your assistance is not required." James slowly raised his hands, trying to appear as non-threatening as possible to someone who barely reached his knee. "With all due respect, Commander, you've crashed in the middle of one of the worst storms I've seen in 20 years. The temperature's dropping to lethal levels, and your ship appears damaged. I'm James Blackwood, Forest Ranger for this sector. Helping people in trouble is literally my job." Talia's eyes narrowed as she studied him, their color shifting like the aurora borealis. "Your concern is noted but unnecessary. We have survived far worse than your planetary weather." As if to contradict her words, a massive gust of wind swept through the clearing. Several of her crew who had followed her out tumbled through the air before managing to right themselves. Their technological mastery apparently included some form of personal flight capability, but the storm was clearly testing its limits. "My ranger station is less than 2 miles from here," James offered, having to raise his voice over the increasing wind. "It has tools, shelter, and a workshop where you could make repairs without freezing to death. I swear on my position as a ranger that you'll be safe there." Talia conferred briefly with her officers in a language that sounded like wind chimes and breaking waves. James waited patiently, snow accumulating on his shoulders as they debated. Finally, she turned back to him. "Your offer is appreciated," she said carefully. "However, understand that any hostile action will be met with immediate and overwhelming force. We may be small by your standards, but our weapons are more than capable of neutralizing threats many times our size. James nodded solemnly. I understand. But right now, my only concern is getting you folks somewhere safe before this storm gets any worse. Speaking of which. He glanced at their ship, its lights flickering slightly. How exactly are we going to move your vessel? A small smile crossed Talia's face, the first he'd seen. She produced a crystalline device from her uniform. Our technology has solutions for that. What we need is shelter and time. She paused, studying him again. Tell me, James Blackwood, why are you so willing to help beings who are clearly not of your world? Because it's the right thing to do, he answered without hesitation. And because anyone who's traveled across the stars to get here probably has some amazing stories to tell. Something shifted in Talia's expression, surprise, perhaps, or reassessment. She turned to her crew and gave a series of musical commands. The ship's lights pulsed in response, and slowly, impossibly, it began to shrink until it was no larger than a microwave oven. Well, James said after a moment, that certainly simplifies transportation. He shrugged off his outer coat despite the cold. Here, we can wrap it in this for extra protection. Your sophisticated technology versus Earth weather. I know which one I'm betting on right now. As they prepared to move through the storm, James couldn't shake the feeling that this night would change everything, not just for him, but possibly for all of humanity. He watched as the tiny aliens secured their miniaturized vessel, each movement precise and coordinated. Whatever brought them to Earth, he suspected their true mission was far more complex than a simple crash landing. The wind rose to a fever pitch as they began their journey through the darkness, carrying with it the first whispers of a story that would reshape two civilizations forever. Above them, the storm raged on, oblivious to the momentous encounter it had helped orchestrate in the heart of the wilderness. The ranger station's workshop had never seen technology quite like this. 3 days after the crash, James watched in fascination as Talia's crew worked to repair their ship, which remained in its compressed state atop his workbench. The aliens had transformed the space into something out of a science fiction movie, with holographic displays floating in the air and crystalline tools that hummed with barely contained energy. Your curiosity is showing again, James Blackwood, Talia said, floating up to eye level with him. Over the past days, she'd grown more comfortable using his first name, though she still maintained a formal distance. The same couldn't be said for all her crew. Some had taken to perching on his shoulders while working, treating him like a mobile observation platform. Can you blame me? He asked, carefully adjusting a magnifying lamp for a team working on what they'd called the quantum drive matrix. I'm watching the impossible happen in a place where the most advanced technology used to be my coffee maker. Talia's expression softened slightly. Your assistance has been invaluable. Few of your species would have shown such acceptance of our presence. Speaking of my species, James said carefully, I've been meaning to ask about those weapons you're carrying. They seem a bit elaborate for a simple reconnaissance mission. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Talia's markings dimmed slightly, something James had learned indicated stress or concern. You are more observant than we anticipated. 20 years of tracking wildlife teaches you to notice details, he replied, keeping his voice casual despite the tension now crackling through the air. Like how your crew runs combat drills when they think I'm asleep, or how that compressed ship of yours has what looks suspiciously like weapon ports. Before Talia could respond, one of her officers, a stern-faced alien named Rhine, flew over. Commander, we're detecting multiple quantum signatures approaching Earth's solar system. The invasion fleet is ahead of schedule. James felt his heart stop. I'm sorry, the what fleet? Talia shot Rhine a look that could have frozen hydrogen. Return to your post, Lieutenant. She turned back to James, her ethereal features set in a grave expression. It seems we owe you an explanation. You think? James stood, his usual calm cracking slightly. Were you planning to mention the invasion before or after I helped you repair your ship? It's not that simple, Talia said, her voice taking on a pleading note he'd never heard before. My people, the Luminarii, were dying. Our sun is failing, and we've searched thousands of worlds for a new home. Earth was supposed to be perfect, rich in resources, suitable atmosphere, and a dominant species that our intelligence suggested would be easily managed. Managed, James repeated flatly. You mean controlled? That's what all those combat drills were about, practicing how to subdue us. Our technology allows us to influence larger species, Talia explained. Or it should. But you've proven remarkably resistant. You, specifically, seem immune to our attempts at subtle manipulation. It's part of why I've... She trailed off, her markings pulsing with colors James hadn't seen before. Part of why you've what? He pressed. Part of why I've begun to question everything about this mission, she finished quietly. Your kindness, your acceptance, your willingness to help even when suspicious of our motives, these are not the actions of a species that deserves to be conquered. A sharp laugh cut through the air. Rhine had returned, along with several other officers. Commander, you're letting your feelings for this primitive cloud your judgment. The mission parameters are clear. The mission parameters were based on flawed intelligence, Talia snapped back. We can't just... The fleet approaches, Rhine interrupted. They will arrive within 48 hours. If you won't do what's necessary, Commander, there are those of us who will. James watched as the workshop erupted into chaos, crew members taking sides between Talia and Rhine. Weapons were drawn, tiny but deadly serious. And in the middle of it all, he saw Talia looking at him with an expression of such conflict and pain that it made his chest ache. Everyone stop. His voice boomed through the space, causing several aliens to tumble in surprise. Your fleet's coming? Fine. But before you start shooting each other, maybe consider that Earth might surprise you the same way I did. What are you suggesting? Talia asked, her eyes gleaming with something that looked like hope. I'm suggesting that instead of an invasion, you try asking for help. James spread his hands. You're looking for a home. Earth has a pretty good track record of taking in refugees. Sure, there would be fear and suspicion at first, but if you come in peace. Impossible, Rhine sneered. Our entire battle strategy relies on maintaining the element of surprise. If we reveal ourselves honestly, Talia cut in, we might find allies instead of slaves. She flew closer to James, her markings now pulsing with brilliant colors. But such a decision would need to be proven wise. We would need evidence that humanity as a whole would react as you have. James smiled slightly. Well, you've got about 48 hours to let me prove it to you. Any ideas where we should start? Talia returned his smile, though hers held a hint of mischief. Actually, yes. How do you feel about taking a field trip? There are some people I think you should meet, humans who have encountered others like us but kept our secret. Perhaps between their testimony and your advocacy. You can't be serious, Rhine protested. This is treason. No, Talia said firmly. This is evolution. And possibly the salvation of both our species. She turned to her crew. The choice is yours. Follow me in seeking a peaceful solution, or remain here and await the fleet. But know that if you choose war, you'll be fighting both humanity and your own kind. The workshop fell silent as crew's members looked at each other, at their commander, and at the human who had appended all their carefully laid plans. Finally, one by one, most began moving to Talia's side. Rhine and a handful of others remained apart, their expressions hard. You're making a mistake, Rhine said quietly. One that will doom our people. No, Talia replied. I'm choosing to believe that strength can be found in cooperation rather than conquest. She turned to James. We should leave immediately. We have much to do and very little time. As James helped the aliens gather their equipment, he caught Talia watching him with an unreadable expression. Having second thoughts, he asked softly. About stopping an invasion? No. She floated closer, her voice dropping. About allowing myself to feel things no commander should feel for a species we were meant to conquer? That's considerably more complicated. James felt his heart skip a beat, but before he could respond, the workshop erupted into chaos. Rhine and her supporters had made their move, weapons firing brilliant bursts of energy that filled the air with ozone and light. The battle for Earth's future had begun, and it was starting in a forest ranger's workshop in the middle of nowhere. The universe, James reflected as he dove for cover, had a peculiar sense of humor. Dawn broke over the Montana wilderness as James's truck sped down empty backroads, its headlights cutting through lingering patches of fog. In the passenger seat, Talia's miniature form stood on the dashboard, her crystalline instruments projecting a holographic map that overlaid the windshield with ghostly blue light. Take the next right, she instructed, her voice tense. Dr. Novak's research facility is hidden in an old mining complex. If anyone can help us prove humanity's worth to the fleet, it's her. The battle at the ranger station had left its marks. Several of Talia's crew nursed minor injuries, while Rhine and her loyalists had escaped with the repaired ship, presumably to contact the approaching fleet. They were now in a race against both time and their own kind. Tell me about Dr. Novak, James said, making the turn onto a gravel road that wound into the hills. How does a human scientist know about your people? Talia's markings pulsed with something like amusement. Daniela Novak has been studying us for decades, though we never officially acknowledged her. She's brilliant, methodical, and most importantly, she's kept our existence secret while documenting every peaceful interaction between our species. And there have been many such interactions? More than you'd imagine. Small groups of our kind have been visiting Earth for centuries, studying, learning, and occasionally. She paused, her colors shifting to deeper hues, forming connections. James felt the weight of her words. The growing attraction between them hadn't been discussed since their hasty departure, but it hung in the air like static before a storm. Before he could respond, one of Talia's officers, a tactical specialist named Ven, called out in alarm. Commander. Multiple vehicles approaching from the north. Military signatures. How did they find us? James asked, gripping the steering wheel tighter. They didn't, Talia said grimly. They're heading for the facility. Rhine must have transmitted its location to human authorities before contacting the fleet. She's trying to eliminate any evidence of peaceful coexistence. The road crested a hill, revealing a convoy of black SUVs converging on a cluster of seemingly abandoned buildings nestled against the mountainside. As they watched, figures in tactical gear began emerging from the vehicles. We're too late, James muttered, but Talia was already issuing rapid commands to her crew. Then, activate stealth protocols. Breach team, prepare for infiltration. James. She turned to him, her ethereal features set with determination. How do you feel about committing several federal crimes to save two worlds? He couldn't help but smile. Wouldn't be the first law I've broken since meeting you. They parked the truck in a sheltered gully and moved through the underbrush on foot. The Luminari's stealth technology rendered them nearly invisible, while James relied on 2 decades of wilderness experience to move silently. They reached the facility's perimeter just as the military team was breaching the main entrance. Dr. Novak has protocols for this, Talia explained as they crept around to a hidden side entrance. She'll have hidden her most critical research. We just need to reach her backup servers before they do. Inside, the facility was a maze of laboratories and offices. They could hear the military team searching rooms ahead of them. James marveled at how efficiently Talia's crew moved, disabled security systems, and gathered intelligence. Even at their tiny size, they were incredibly capable. They found Dr. Novak in her main lab, calmly deleting files while armed men shouted in the hallway. She was older than James expected, with steel-gray hair and eyes that held decades of secrets. When Talia revealed herself, the scientist merely nodded as if tiny aliens were an everyday occurrence. "Commander Talia, I presume?" Novak said quietly. "I was wondering when we'd finally meet properly." "Doctor, we need your research." "All of it. The fleet arrives in less than 36 hours, and..." The door burst open. Armed men poured in, weapons raised. "Federal agents. Hands where we can see them." James moved without thinking, placing himself between the agents and where Talia hovered near Novak's computer. "Wait. You don't understand what's happening here." "Step aside, sir," the lead agent ordered. "We have credible intelligence about a threat to national security." "Oh, there's definitely a threat," Dr. Novak said calmly, pressing a final key on her computer. "But not from who you think." She smiled slightly. "Would you like to see what I've spent my life studying?" Before anyone could respond, the lab's lights dimmed. Holographic displays sprang to life on every wall, showing decades of documented encounters between humans and luminarii. Peaceful meetings, collaborative projects, even friendships formed across the species barrier. And through it all, humanity's capacity for acceptance and adaptation shone through. "What is this?" the lead agent demanded, though his weapon had lowered slightly. "This," Talia said, revealing herself and her crew, "is the truth about our people's shared history. And possibly our shared future, if we act quickly enough." The next few hours were a blur of explanations, revelations, and hasty communications up the chain of command. Dr. Novak's research proved invaluable, demonstrating time and again that peaceful cooperation was possible. As military and government officials began arriving at the facility, James found himself acting as an impromptu ambassador, sharing his own experiences alongside Talia's diplomatic efforts. But time was running out. Even as they made progress convincing Earth's authorities, the Luminarii fleet drew closer. Rhine and her supporters were surely painting a very different picture of humanity to their approaching leaders. Late that night, James found Talia alone in Dr. Novak's office, reviewing tactical displays with a troubled expression. Having doubts, he asked softly. She turned to him, her markings glowing with complex emotions. "About stopping the invasion?" "No. About whether we can convince both sides to take this leap of faith?" She sighed. "The fleet commander is traditional. And now Rhine will have poisoned her mind against the very possibility of peace. Then we'll just have to be very convincing." James held out his hand, palm up. After a moment's hesitation, Talia landed on it. The warmth of her tiny form sent shivers through his entire body. "You know," she said, looking up at him, "on my world, there are ancient stories about giants who fell in love with stars. I never understood them until now." "Funny," James replied, his voice rough with emotion. "We have similar stories here. They rarely end well. Perhaps it's time to write a new ending." Talia's markings blazed with sudden intensity. "But first, we have to save both our worlds." A distant alarm began to sound. On every screen in the facility, new contacts appeared, the fleet had arrived early. The moment of truth was upon them, ready or not. "Together?" James asked. Talia's answer was interrupted by a blinding flash of light from above. The choice they had hoped to prepare for was here, and now everything would depend on what they had built over the past few days: trust, understanding, and something neither of them had dared to name yet. The fate of two worlds hung in the balance, and time had just run out. The night sky above Montana blazed with impossible colors as the Luminarii fleet dropped their cloaking technology. Massive ships, each one rippling with the same organic metallic design as Talia's crashed vessel, took up positions in low Earth orbit. Their presence sent the human world into chaos, military forces mobilized, governments scrambled, and social media exploded with shaky footage of the ethereal lights above. In Dr. Novak's facility, now transformed into an impromptu first contact command center, James watched multiple screens showing the global reaction. Beside him, Talia and her loyal crew worked frantically to establish communication with their fleet, while Dr. Novak coordinated with increasingly panicked government officials. "The quantum arrays are online," Ven reported, his tiny form darting between crystalline control interfaces. "We're receiving a transmission from the fleet commander." A holographic image materialized in the center of the room, a luminary woman whose presence made even Talia straighten to attention. Her skin was the color of deep space, and her markings moved like constellations across her form. This was High Commander Aurelia, leader of the invasion fleet and, as James had recently learned, Talia's mother. "Daughter," Aurelia's voice carried centuries of authority. "Lieutenant Rhine has informed me of your betrayal. Explain yourself." Talia moved forward, her own markings pulsing with determination. "Mother, what Rhine calls betrayal, I call enlightenment. The intelligence about Earth was wrong. These humans aren't primitive beings to be conquered, they're potential allies who could help save our people. And this assessment wouldn't happen to be influenced by your attachment to one of them?" Aurelia's gaze fixed on James with the weight of galaxies. Before Talia could respond, alarms blared throughout the facility. Dr. Novak's hands flew across her keyboards. "Multiple breaches. Rhine's forces are attacking our security systems." The lights flickered and died, plunging the room into darkness broken only by emergency lighting and the glow of alien technology. Through the facility's windows, James could see more tiny ships approaching, their weapon ports gleaming with deadly intent. "You see?" Rhine's voice cut through the chaos as she and her supporters materialized in the room. "They can't even protect one building. How can they be worthy of an alliance?" "Funny thing about us primitives," James said, carefully reaching for the device Dr. Novak had given him earlier. "We're full of surprises." He activated the quantum resonator, and suddenly Rhine's technology flickered and failed. Her forces dropped from the air, their flight systems temporarily disabled. The room erupted into chaos. Tiny energy weapons fired, creating a deadly light show as Talia's loyal forces engaged the attackers. James and Dr. Novak took cover behind overturned furniture, trying to avoid being caught in the crossfire while still supporting their diminutive allies. Above it all, High Commander Aurelia's hologram watched with an unreadable expression. "Is this what you offer us, Talia? Civil war? I offer you hope." Talia shouted back, ducking under a burst of energy fire. "Look around you, Mother. Look at how James and Dr. Novak fight alongside us, even though they could easily crush all of us. They choose cooperation over dominance. That strength our people never considered." A new alarm sounded, different this time. Dr. Novak's eyes widened as she checked her instruments. Multiple nuclear launches detected. Earth's military commands are treating this as a first strike scenario. James felt his blood run cold. This was humanity's fear response kicking in, exactly what they'd hoped to avoid. He looked at Talia, saw the same horror in her eyes, and made a decision. "High Commander," he addressed Aurelia directly, standing tall despite the battle raging around his feet. "You came here looking for a new home. Well, Earth has a long history of taking in refugees, of different peoples learning to live together. Yes, we're afraid right now, you would be too if giant ships appeared over your world. But fear doesn't have to lead to destruction." "You speak well for a primitive," Aurelia said, but there was something new in her tone, curiosity, perhaps. "Mother," Talia flew to hover between James and the hologram. "Our world is dying. We came here prepared to take Earth by force. But what if we could share it instead? What if the very differences that Rhine sees as weakness could be our salvation? A burst of weapons fire nearly struck Talia. James moved instinctively to shield her, taking a grazing hit to his arm that left it numb. The pain was worth it to see the way Aurelia's expression changed, watching a human risk injury to protect one of her people. Enough! Aurelia's command froze everyone in place. Rhine, stand down. Talia, you believe these humans would actually share their world with us? After we came to conquer them? We're all standing in a facility run by a human who's been peacefully studying our people for decades, Talia pointed out. And James's first instinct upon finding us was to offer help, not violence. There are billions of humans, yes, some will fear us, but others will amaze us with their capacity for acceptance. Dr. Novak's computers beeped urgently. The nuclear launches, someone needs to make a decision now. High Commander Aurelia was silent for a long moment, her markings shifting through colors James had never seen before. Finally, she spoke. Daughter, you have 10 minutes to prove your theory. After that, I must protect our people, one way or another. The hologram vanished, leaving them with an impossible deadline and a room full of armed, angry luminarii. James looked at Talia, then at Dr. Novak, and managed a grim smile. Well, he said, I guess it's time to see if love really can save the world. Talia's markings flashed with affection and determination. 10 minutes to prevent an interstellar war and convince two species to take a leap of faith? Her tiny hand touched his wounded arm. We've faced worse odds. Around them, both loyal and rebellious luminarii watched and waited. The next 10 minutes would determine not just their fate, but the future of two civilizations. The revolution of the small had begun, now they just had to survive it. High above, the fleet's weapons powered up as Earth's missiles streaked towards the heavens. The clock was ticking, and the real battle was just beginning. 9 minutes to save two worlds. Dr. Novak's facility hummed with desperate activity as James, Talia, and their allies raced against time. Nuclear missiles climbed through the atmosphere while the Luminarii fleet's weapons remained charged and ready. One wrong move would trigger a catastrophe. The quantum transmitter is ready, Dr. Novak announced, her fingers flying across multiple keyboards. If we're going to show the world both sides of this story, it has to be now. James looked at Talia, who nodded. They had planned for this, though they'd hoped to have more time. Do it, he commanded. Across the Earth, every digital display, from Times Square's massive screens to individual smartphones, flickered to life. Dr. Novak's decades of research began streaming globally, documented encounters between humans and luminarii, peaceful interactions spanning centuries, evidence of cooperation and friendship between the species. That's step one, Talia said, her markings pulsing with nervous energy. Now for the hard part. 7 minutes remaining. James stepped forward, knowing his image was being broadcast worldwide alongside the historical footage. My name is James Blackwood, he began, his voice steady despite his racing heart. I'm a forest ranger from Montana, and 3 days ago, I met some visitors who changed everything I thought I knew about the universe. As he spoke, Talia flew to hover beside his face, deliberately visible to all cameras. Behind them, her loyal crew and even some of Rhine's former supporters moved into view. The sight of tiny, luminescent aliens floating peacefully next to a human sparked a wave of global reactions, fear and wonder battling for supremacy. We stand at a crossroads, Talia addressed her people and humanity simultaneously. Two civilizations, each facing their own crisis. Ours is a dying world, yours a divided one. Apart, we may both fall. Together. A new alarm blared. Missile lock from multiple Earth defense systems. Dr. Novak warned. 5 minutes. Mother, Talia called out, her voice carrying to the fleet above. Show them. Show them who we really are. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, incredibly, the massive ships above began to transform. Their threatening configurations shifted, weapon ports closing as their hulls became transparent. Inside each vessel, thousands of tiny luminariae could be seen going about their lives, families, children, ordinary people seeking a new home. "We are not conquerors," High Commander Aurelia's voice echoed worldwide as her image appeared again. "We are refugees, seeking sanctuary among the stars. My daughter believes humanity capable of sharing their world. Prove her right." For minutes. Across the globe, people watched as the truth unfolded. The luminaria's small size made them no threat to Earth's resources. They could build entire cities in the spaces humans never used. Their advanced technology could help solve environmental crises. Two species could coexist, each offering what the other lacked. "Stand down the missiles," James pleaded to his own kind. "Look at them, really look. They're families, dreamers, explorers, just like us." 3 minutes. In the facility, Rhine suddenly flew forward. "Commander Aurelia, you can't trust these giants. They're primitive, violent." "We are what we choose to be," James interrupted. "Human history is full of moments when we chose fear over friendship, violence over understanding. But it's also full of moments when we chose to be better." He held out his hand, and after a moment's hesitation, Rhine landed on it. "We can choose again." 2 minutes. Around the world, something remarkable began to happen. Social media exploded not with panic, but with hope. People shared their own stories of unexplained encounters, of mysterious lights and tiny helpers. The luminariae had been among them all along, watching, waiting, hoping. In major cities, crowds gathered not to flee, but to watch in wonder. Children pointed at the sky with joy instead of fear. Humanity, given the chance to choose between fear and friendship, was choosing friendship. 1 minute. "The defense systems are standing down," Dr. Novak reported, tears in her eyes. "Nuclear launches aborted. Military forces moving to defensive posture only. Above, the fleet's weapons powered down." High Commander Aurelia's expression softened as she watched humans around the world extend their welcome. "Perhaps," she said quietly, "there is wisdom in being small. In learning to live alongside giants rather than trying to control them." "There's wisdom in working together," Talia replied, her hand finding James's finger and holding tight. "In building something new." 0. The moment of crisis passed. In its wake came the hard work of building trust, of creating frameworks for coexistence, of helping two very different species learn to share a world. But the foundation was laid, not in conquest or control, but in choice and cooperation. 1 year later, James stood on the porch of his ranger station, watching the sunset paint the sky in colors that reminded him of Talia's markings. The station had become a key site in human luminariae relations, its isolation perfect for discreet meetings and cultural exchange. Tiny crystalline structures now dotted the surrounding forest, invisible unless you knew where to look. Luminariae children played in the branches while their parents worked with human scientists, sharing knowledge and building bridges between worlds. "Thinking deep thoughts?" Talia asked, landing on his shoulder. Their relationship had raised eyebrows on both sides, but it had also become a symbol of what was possible when different species chose to see the best in each other. "Just remembering how close we came to losing all this," he replied, watching a group of human researchers consulting with luminariae engineers over a new environmental restoration project. Even Rhine was there, having found her place as a cultural liaison. "We chose a different path," Talia said simply. "Both our peoples did." High above, the transformed luminariae ships had become part of Earth's sky, their presence now a symbol of hope rather than fear. Their transparency showed two species learning to live together, proving that size didn't matter when hearts and minds were open to new possibilities. So, James smiled at the tiny woman who had changed his life and helped change the world, what's our next adventure? Talia's markings blazed with joy and mischief. Well, Mother has been asking when we're going to make her a grandmother. Though she's still not quite clear on how that would work given our size difference. James laughed, the sound echoing through the peaceful forest. Around them, humans and Luminarii continued their shared work, building a future neither species could have imagined alone. The stars twinkled above, holding the promise of more wonders to come, more choices to make, more bridges to build. Sometimes the biggest changes come from the smallest beginnings. All it takes is the courage to choose a different path, and the wisdom to walk it together.